Good morning or good afternoon to those on the East Coast and Central Time Zone. We're going to continue our suite of sessions today with a talk that I'm particularly excited to see. For any of you that were able to join us for the keynotes, the role that data are playing in decision making is becoming increasingly important. The ability to get the right information to be able to make the right decisions, I think, is of critical importance to administrators today. And so I'm very excited to have Don Wood from Odessa College speak a little bit about the experience that Odessa had on trying to incorporate data aggregation to help support that mission. Dr. Don Wood joined Odessa College as an associate professor of biology in 2008 after retiring from a 40-year career in human genetic research and healthcare management. So in January 2011, he was promoted to the Associate Dean of Arts and Sciences, and 1 year later was appointed Vice President for Institutional Effectiveness. A little background on Dr. Wood. Following receipt of his PhD in physiology from Washington State University, he began his research career into causes of genetic neuromuscular diseases at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York, where he became the assistant professor of neurology. Later, he accepted an appointment to the Muscular Dystrophy Association, where he launched their task force on genetics that led to discovery of the genetic causes of muscular dystrophy. And in the 90s, Dr. Wood co-founded 2 genetic development companies and ultimately became the senior vice president of Integra Med America Incorporated, the largest organization for reproductive medicine specialists in the country. So a fantastic background, and I'm really excited that, that Dr. Wood was able to join us today. And so without further ado, I will hand over to Dr. Donald Wood.
Well, thank you very much, Alec, and let me start by thanking McGraw-Hill for giving us the opportunity to talk to a lot of our fellow colleges around the country on some of the things that we've been doing out here. And I hope this becomes is interesting to everybody. And I'm looking forward, have been looking forward to sort of sharing some of the things that we've been doing. But I realized that not many people know or have ever heard of Odessa College. We are out in West Texas. We're out in West Texas. And in the first slide here, you will see what West Texas kind of looks like. West Texas is the home of the Permian Basin, which is one of, if not the largest producing oil field in the world. This region generates 12 to 15% of all U.S. energy that we use on a year basis, and that's pretty much what it's known for. Except there are a couple of other things that we're known for. And by the way, the reason I'm bringing this up is this will come up a little bit later for interesting reasons. We're also known for Roy Orbison. He was a graduate of Odessa College, believe it or not, and Friday Night Lights. Many of you have undoubtedly not only heard, but maybe seen the movie and the television series on Friday Night Lights. Well, those high schools were filmed here and the story was written about the high schools here in Ector County that we serve. So those are 2 other things. They won't come up again, but I just thought I'd give you sort of an orientation as to Odessa, Texas. This is our college, at least the center area of the college. We're in our 70th year in this region. We cover this huge 33,000 square miles. We have the largest territory of any community college in America. That sounds like a lot, except that mostly that territory are prairie dogs and oil wells. So we don't have a lot of people out here. We are, in fact, a rural community college. We are an Hispanic serving institution. Most of our students, when they enter college, are on Pell Grants. There's not a real college-going tradition in this region. Just to give you a sense of it, only 16% of the adults in the areas we serve have a bachelor's degree or higher. And the national average is closer to 30%, and the Texas average is about 27%. 28%. So we don't have a college-going culture. We serve, as I said, we serve students who in other contexts would be considered socioeconomically disadvantaged students, minority students without college-going culture, backgrounds, etc. That would sound like a big challenge, but if you think about it a different way, it makes it a kind of a laboratory, if you will. If you're going to have new programs, new ideas that are really going to move the dial in terms of improving student achievement, educational outcomes, etc., coming to a place like this is a good place to start, because if something works here, it's likely to work virtually anywhere. And the other aspect to know about us is that we are one of 4 community colleges within this region. That gives us another sort of laboratory-like setting, is that you can kind of match your own progress against others, because we're all influenced pretty much by the same environmental variables in terms of college-going culture, the work ethics, and other key aspects of what it takes to get a college education or encourage college education in this region. In the next slide, there are two dominant situations here in Odessa that influence virtually everything we do one way or another. That is the unemployment picture. When you have a single dominant industry like we do, when oil prices are down like they are right now in terms of dollars per barrel, unemployment goes up. And when the price of oil goes up, unemployment drops like a rock. And that influences enrollments in K through 12 and in colleges. So enrollments go up and down pretty much in lockstep with the unemployment out here. We'll come back to that in a little bit. The other aspect that's incredibly important is the Texas legislature funding decisions as they relate to community colleges. In Texas, we have a very strong university system. The University of Texas system is well-funded, tremendous amount of money goes into that. Community colleges, however, are not in the same boat. Every 2 years, community college funding comes up. And to give you a sense of how that works, about 10 years ago, close to 46% of all the revenue at Odessa College and most of the community colleges came from the Texas state funding. This past year, right now, in the current funding thing, that is down to 16%. So revenue streams have to be picked up not from the state legislature, but locally. And in order to continue to try and encourage students to come to college, we really have to, and keep the costs down. That becomes another big challenge that we face. And each year over the last 10 years, that community college funding has gone down, and in the next session, it's anticipated to go down another 10%. So those are sort of the general sort of overview of the environment in which we operate. Talked about unemployment, and these are just quotes out of the local newspapers, and basically just say the same thing that we can say in 100 different ways, is when unemployment goes up, people are out of work, college enrollments will go up, and when work is plentiful, college enrollments go down. Hard to run a business, let alone a college, when you don't control the volume of customers you're going to have. So that makes it kind of tough. The other aspect, when we talk about the Texas legislature thinking about what they want to do, hit Odessa College fairly dramatically in January 2011, when the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, decided they needed to cut a whole bunch of state funding to community colleges and identified 4 community colleges in the state for possible defunding, one of which was Odessa College. Now, by that time, of course, we've been around, 65 years? That's a hard thing to take. That's a hard thing to hear. Obviously, we weren't defunded, but it sort of look at yourself, and we had conversations about, good heavens, all of a sudden this came out of the blue. There had been no indication for that. They said that they were looking at defunding because what? Well, because they felt that our enrollment had not increased too much in the last 20 years. Like I said, we're in a rural area. We don't really have an opportunity, to increase enrollment that much. We thought that was kind of unfair, but there's not much you can do about it. We obviously went to the legislature and tried to argue our way around this in the public sense. But internally, the issue was, okay, we are going to have to do something and do something big and make a change so that defunding and Odessa College never again come up in the same sentence. So what are we going to do? Well, okay, now I'm looking at a slide that is not my slide. It looks like we're going to have a problem apparently with the slides, which I did not see before, and I apologize. Alec, are you still on the line?
I am. We can skip past the slide. I'm not quite sure why it was added in there.
Well, the difficulty is that I'm going to lose all this. It looks like we're going to lose the slides that relate to the data that I'm going to show for the data, and that would be sort of sad.
So do we have our an Expo engineer on here?
Yeah, I don't know what we're going to do. Okay, so, well, I kind of do know. A picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So I'm going to have 1,000 words for each kind of thing. Can we go back? And I'm losing actually all connectivity. Okay, let me go back.
We're just working on that just now.
Okay. So the point was that we had to do something to address our situation. There was no way we were ever going to become so huge a college that they couldn't defund us. We were going to have to improve on the basis of quality. The challenge we had, so we're going to have better. So we were going to have to do something with data. We're going to have to develop stuff. And the question is sort of, what do you want to do with the data? What do you want to do with data in a situation like that? And the choices, I think most people out there who are listening to this know that you can do a lot of different things with data. You can examine where you've been. You could try to explain where you're going. You could try to figure out to make improvements, tell a story, evaluate employees, a whole host of things that you could do. And we made a decision that our North Star for the next period of time was going to try to become the best community college in the nation as based on student achievements, based on the outcomes for students. So that led us to the next sort of aspect, which is what kind of data do we want? What kind of data do we want? And there's only two options. You can have either qualitative data or you can have quantitative data. Well, so let's take a look at that and say, well, qualitative data, and here again, I got to apologize. These are not the slides that were presented, but hopefully we can work through them. On the qualitative data, what you can do is you can notice things, collect things, think about things. Basically, it's how Odessa College had been run for 65 years. So if you look at a program or a project, as many colleges put in place, say, is that a good program? Do people like it? And people say, yeah, we like that. Or, no, we don't like it. Why don't you like it? You have conversations. But when you don't measure anything, we don't have any base to figure out, okay, what does an improvement look like? It's sort of mostly on your feelings. And we'd done that for 65 years, and as a college, to be frank, we'd gotten nowhere. We were not noticeable. Like I said and showed at the beginning, people knew us from Friday Night Lights. They knew about Roy Orbison and oil, but they certainly weren't talking about a community college named Odessa College in relation to improving student outcomes. The difficulty with the qualitative data is it doesn't tell you how much better or worse off you over time if you look at it. It doesn't give you a foundation. I call it the good, better, best. I don't know if when you were kids, but we had this saying, good, better, best. Make the good better and the better best. But you don't really know what's good or what's best. For example, had instructors talking about best practices, and you've all heard that. What are best practices? Well, that sort of begs questions like, so if it's not a best practice, is it a good practice? And is it a better practice? Is this practice better than that practice? And how do you know? Well, from a qualitative data standpoint, you really can't prove it one way or the other. You can have a feeling about it. You can love one approach better than another approach, but like good, better, and best, you can't quantify loving something. So that.
My apologies, everyone. We'll have.
Alec, can you hear me?
Fantastic. Hey, welcome back on.
Well, thank you. I apologize for that little pause. I'm waiting till the screen shows up. I don't have a screen yet, but hopefully that will work. I don't know what other people can see or not see.
We can still see your qualitative data slide.
Okay. So anyway, basically, we couldn't get where we wanted to go with qualitative data. And what's interesting here is, and I'm sure like most colleges, we actually had a massive amount of quantitative data. We had over 35 years of data entry into colleague. We had almost 400,000 person records. We had a couple of million transcript data entries, student stuff. We had 10 million other records entries. We had a massive amount of data. But we didn't have any way really to get access to that data. We didn't have access. You could, but it required what I call homebrew programming. There wasn't any kind of coordinated approach that we could buy or that we had on campus to actually figure out how to access all the different fields, all the different data fields. And with 35 years of homebrew programming, you can imagine how difficult it would be, or was, for anyone to be able to work with those data. So, and then the other aspect of it is because we had never, as a college, worked to try and develop the quantitative aspects of our data or the access to it. We had often sent incomplete and inaccurate data to reporting agencies like IPEDS, the federal government, like Texas, which collects in massive amount of data. But because nobody paid much attention to quantitative data back then, nobody paid much attention as to whether the data were correct or incorrect relative to what was going on. And then, are you able to advance the slides, Alec? Alec?
Yes.
Are you able to advance?
I was just able to move it forward onto the.
Could you move it forward to a slide that shows quantitative data, Zogotech and Achieving the Dream 2009?
Just moving that forward just now.
And I'm going to go ahead and ask you to move the slides forward because I've lost that capability for some reason. That's okay, as long as you can do it and the audience can see it. The quantitative data aspect of what we were doing sort of came into our lives when we joined Achieving the Dream. Achieving the Dream, for those of you who know it, I don't have to explain it, but for those of you who might not be aware of what Achieving the Dream does, they're a national organization support for community colleges that came into being in the mid-2000 area, 2007 or 8, I think it was. And the goal was to improve success. Community colleges have always had focuses on student access, but not so much on student success. And Achieving the Dream was the first national organization to really work to change that. And when you become a member of Achieving the Dream, you get two coaches. You get an Achieving the Dream coach, and you get a data coach because they work from data. So they come out to Odessa College, and basically the data coach had nothing to do. Why? Because we had this massive amount of data that we couldn't access, or hard difficulty to access. And we didn't know where we were relative to equity. We didn't know where we were relative to pace of student progress through developmental ed courses, into gateway courses. I mean, you name it, we didn't have much of a clue of anything. And that's when someone brought our attention to what it was at the time a fairly young company, Zogotech, which had tried to address this problem that faces lots of colleges, which is we might have lots and lots of data, but we don't have really an easy way to access it or work with it. And I'm not going to go through all the things that they do, but it was transformational for our college when we first got an opportunity to start looking at the data that was already in our system and had been collected for years. And it allowed us to start creating a culture of evidence. And as you can see on the slide, we began to worry now about the accuracy of the data that we were inputting to the system, so we changed how we actually developed quality control systems for data input. We established an entirely new administrative team position, which is my position, Vice President for Institutional Effectiveness, and I am involved in every single decision the college makes. I head up the strategic development sessions, et cetera, all based on sort of going forward positions based on data, based on where are we now and where would we like to go. And you can read the other kinds of things. So then if we could, Alec, if you could move to the next slide, where do we start? Where do you start when you're a college like us that had never really worked with quantitative data? And so the way I look at it is sort of simplistically, but you can divide up what you can do into what I call leading indicators and lagging indicators. The basic concept that sort of underlies what I'm going to talk about now is you can't teach them if they aren't there. So the first thing you got to do is you've got to pay attention to getting the students there. That is first and foremost, obviously, an enrollment issue. Second, however, very importantly, and perhaps what I hope to show you a little bit later, perhaps most importantly, is keeping them going to class. Don't let them drop out. And I'm using that word intentionally. Don't let them drop out. And you should ask, so how do you stop them? So it's short of shackles and chains, which we don't have. We don't do that. And then once you've got them, then you're going to have to be effective. That's how we talk, is be effective in improving student success. If those leading indicators are all improving, then the lagging indicators will also improve inevitably. So we didn't focus on the lagging indicators. What we focused on was the leading indicators. One of the leading indicators, and I'm going to talk about two of them, well, all three of them ultimately, was enrollment. And could you flip to the next slide, Alec? Just give me a heads up that you did it, so I know.
Yes, it's on the next slide.
Okay, great. So in enrollment, the first and most important thing that we did was we have to know where we are. And by that, I don't mean waiting until census day and picking a number. I mean, in terms of progress towards improving enrollment, you need to know where you stand. How many applications do you have? How many students have registered for classes, et cetera, et cetera? How many students who were in college last semester are re-enrolling and up to then? And I won't go through all the details. because I want to get onto some other things. But what we do now is we track student enrollments daily, literally daily. And we compare those enrollments to the same time in the previous year. And we now have data that we can do enrollment comparisons to the actual comparable day going back 4 or 5 years. Now, what does that do? Well, it does a lot of things. First of all, you know whether you're ahead of last year or behind. That's one thing. The other aspect of it is that if you develop marketing campaigns to improve student registrations, etc., you can actually measure whether they do any good. So you can identify the day you start the campaign. You can see whether there's a bump up, no flat, whatever. You can start to become more and more what I'm going to call scientific about your approach to bringing students into college. Another aspect that Zogotech gave us was that we could look at every single student who had been enrolled, say, the previous semester, and at any point in time before the next semester, we could see which ones had reapplied. And what we did was we could also see which ones hadn't reapplied, and then we could call them, and we did. Said, hey, would you like to come again? Would you like to do this? What's going on? Tons of different ways to approach it, but the most important is that we could be very specific and target in terms of who we were calling and trying to bring in. That was beyond a home run. That one process, we at one point had something like 570 some students that we'd identified as not having signed up. We, within 3 weeks of the first day of class of the following semester, we started calling them based on the data that we now had, and we ended up enrolling over 400 of those students. You could say, well, maybe if you hadn't called them, they wouldn't have enrolled, but we found that it does help to call. That led us, and so what I say is everything we're doing now with quantitative data for Odessa College is like a strategic experiment. You don't know until you start it how effective it might be, and when you see that effect, it leads you to new ideas. That's another big advantage to doing things quantitatively, is that when you see something work, you start thinking of, well, could I make it work better? In this particular case, the success we had in contacting the students who hadn't yet enrolled in the next semester led us to think, well, why do we make them enroll at all? Why don't we just automatically enroll? Why don't we just get them set up and automatically enroll them? Why go through all that paperwork and effort? That leads you to saying, well, you got to do the advising, you got to do all of those kind of things. That led us to a whole new holistic advising model, where we now have each student gets a success coach. The success coach meets with them before they ever start a class at Odessa College, identifies through, and we've moved away, just as a side point, probably the most confusing literature in the English language is a course catalog. I don't know anybody that can go to a course catalog and figure out what do you want to do with the rest of your life. So what we did was we simplified it by making meta majors, basically condensing everything into sort of 5 meta majors, so that when we sat down with the students for the first time, we not only could talk about them in terms of their courses they take, but we really started out talking to them about what area of career interest do you have. Do you want to go into the STEM fields? Do you want to go into public service? Do you want to go into business? I mean, with broad brush strokes like that, it was easier for the students to see where their interests were, easier for the coaches to see where they were. So once we knew that, we said, well, okay, why do we just instead of normally doing one semester at a time, why don't we map out their entire college career over the next 2 years? In other words, develop a student planner and with automatic enrollment, and tell the student, you got to take 20 courses to get your associate's degree. Here's when you're going to take them. We could then talk to them about when's the best time to take it. Do you need to be a night student? Most of our students are part-time, by the way, so they're mostly all working. We started a weekend college to adapt to students that could only go to school on the weekends. It started to inform us in terms of when do we need to present the courses based on what our students need, All starting from the standpoint of starting to do quantitative data and looking at it we evolved and evolved and evolved. We eventually evolved to the point of saying, you know what? Why don't we do first class free? Why don't we create first class free? And there's a lot of wow. How much tuition are you going to lose with that? Remember I told you about the state funding getting cut back, and of course most people would think we're crazy. And we were nervous. We were nervous because you don't know if you give first class free, are they just going to take one class and then drop it? So we tried it. And we offered first class free. And what was amazing was that instead of just taking one class, over 90% of the students would sign up for two. So you got one class free, and then they paid for the other class. But you say, well, if they don't, if it's free, are they just going to drop more often? And the answer was no, actually they didn't drop at all. They actually, if anything, we saw an improvement in semester-to-semester retention. So again, by doing things quantitatively, you can identify really kind of radical ideas, have a chance to test them out, and find out whether they really do work. And in this case, they really do work. Now here's where I don't know if you guys can see it, because the next slide, Alec, when you turn up the next slide, is there a picture there?
Yeah, it's unemployment data that dominates life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the region.
Right, and you can see an oil well and a cowboy?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Okay. Remember when I told you that we're dominated out here by unemployment, and that dictates your enrollment. So on the left side, where you see the growth in the peak, where unemployment is jumping up to a little over 9%, it was at that time that Odessa College, remember I told you we had 4 community colleges in the area, the Odessa College, all of those colleges, and the entire state of Texas at that time had the highest community college student enrollment in history for all of us. We all had this huge thing. And then when the unemployment rate starts dropping, as you see over 2010, 11, 12, 13, down to 2014, we have less than 3% unemployed, which is the best in the country, not just best in Texas, best in the country. At that point, enrollments would have plummeted. So the next slide you're going to see that unenrollment picture superimposed on Odessa College enrollment. And if you flip to that, Alec.
Yep, it's on the screen.
Okay. And I think you can all see a dramatic change right around 2011. And all of a sudden, for the first time in Odessa College history and the first time in the community college history around here, we broke from that pattern. We have a way to identify how to work with our population and keep them in college, change the college-going behavior of students. Again, all starting from simple quantitative data, as I told you, going back just to monitoring what our enrollment was and how we evolved from that. And just to emphasize the huge change all of this brought, the next slide shows you the actual numbers from fall 2010 of enrollments in Texas, all community colleges, and Odessa College and our 3 other related community colleges. We're all within 50 miles of each other, just to give you a sense of dimension. And you can see when the unemployment was dropping and the region had the best employment in the area, the double-digit figures for College 1, they had dropped 27% of their enrollments, College 2, 17, College 3, 10. We rose 5. And we are, and that just emphasizes, I think, the importance of that, of the quantitative aspect that we were able to produce. So now let me go on to the next part. So that's our first leading indicator, enrollment. Let's go to the next one, student success. Remember I talked about, you can't teach them if they aren't there. But when it comes to the classroom, you've got to ask the question, why aren't they there? Why aren't they there? And that was brought home again once we got the Zogotech thing, we could look at our data. We could, and you heard my background when Alex was introducing me. I really have a science, research, medical type background. So I was kind of enjoying going in and looking at the data in lots of different ways. And the next slide was data that stopped me when I'm thinking about student success, and I had to sit there and start scratching my head. Alex, can everybody see the red and green, yellow things?
Yes, it's on the screen.
Okay, great. Here's a class. It's a microbiology class. It's a laboratory class, science. And you got three different instructors. They're teaching different classes of the same course, okay? They use the same text. They use the same syllabi. Because of financial considerations, once you set up a lab exam, everybody had to use the same exam. We couldn't set up three different. So everybody had the same lab exams, same weighting of assessments, same material covered on all exams. If you were a student and walked from Instructor 1's class into Instructor 2's class on any given day, you'd be looking at pretty much the same materials. And yet, if you looked at the percentage of students that were dropping the classes that were being taught, you can obviously see this huge difference between Instructor 1 and Instructor 2 and 3. So like I said, you sort of scratch your head and you wonder about that. Then there were other data that show up in the next slide. In the next slide, what you're looking at is a fascinating glimpse into the relationship between instructor and students. The instructor identified in red is a single instructor who's taught the same class for years, and what you're looking at are several, not all, but several of the years the instructor was teaching, the percentage of students who dropped that class, and the percentage of students who dropped that class in the year in which the instructor had announced his retirement. Notice that jump. As a side point, I can go back to a dozen instructors. Every time they've announced their retirement that year, the drops went up. There was no overlap between that instructor and the new instructor. That instructor retired, a new instructor was hired, that instructor came in, and you can see that immediately different types of drops. So again, head scratching, and I can give many, many examples along the same lines. But that leads to the next slide, which is an attempt to why are students dropping the classes? And so again, because I had this tremendous ability to query my database almost any way I wanted to, I decided to query it and look at instructors over 3 years who had taught 800 or more students. And I sort of just divided them up into what I call the low drop cohort and a high drop cohort. In other words, one group over those 3 years just had a percentage of students that dropped were much lower than the ones above. There's no attempt to match up these by courses or anything else. These are just instructors that had those kind of results over that period of time. So the next thing to do is to look at, okay, what kind of students are these instructors teaching? So before I get there, if you ask folks, instructors, so why do you have such high drops? Or you don't ask them that way. Try to do it nicer. Say, why would there be high drops in one class and not another? So in the next slide, what you get are some real, honest-to-goodness answers, actual quotes. Again, very qualitative quotes, and you could do it in your own colleges, I'm sure. And you get quotes like that. My classes are more rigorous. A lot of my classes are at night. Students are tired. Okay. A lot of my classes are in the morning, and students are tired. Right. And then, of course, there's the instructor that says a lot of my classes are after lunch, and the students are tired. So we sort of got the idea the students are tired. I don't give away grades like some in the department. That's not very nice, but that's what they say. Oh, here's a good one. I teach science, which is a lot tougher for students than English or other easier courses. For those of you out there who have students in English and history and art, you know that's not really true. My point of this is that you're not going to get much if you just ask things that way. So what I did was I decided to ask a question is, could you turn a high drop instructor into a low drop instructor by changing the student mix? In other words, if it's really the students rather than something to do with the instructors. The next slide, just go in and take a look at the students the high drop and low drop instructors taught. If you recall the earlier slide, all those students that they had, about 10,000 in each group. And I just looked at, how many of them were male, female, et cetera. And you can see that regardless of whether you were a high drop instructor or a low drop instructor, the demographics of the students you're teaching was virtually identical. So next slide, just to answer that, just to look at that question again. So could we match those students? Well, what you're going to see in the next slide, and Alex, if you go ahead and flip to the next slide, is you're looking at the same demographic and I'm asking the question here, so what's the percentage of female students who drop when they're being taught by high drop instructors versus low drop instructors? What's the percentage of Hispanic students who are taught by high drop instructors and low drop? And what's absolutely amazing, and you can see it, it's just obvious, there's no student cohort that doesn't have, where high drop instructors don't end up losing more students than the low drop instructors. So the answer, next slide, is no, you can't turn a high drop instructor into a low drop instructor by changing the mix of students they teach. I had those data, but then now comes a problem with quantitative data. You can ask yourself, well, okay, but so what? And that's the challenge. What do you do with something like this? And because I was new to the community college environment, but I did know that you didn't run out of the room and wave data like this at instructors and say, okay, you guys improve. That's not quite how it works. And so I decided not to tell anybody. And now this is when my medical background kicks in. I clearly needed to do some kind of study to try to understand what's going on here. How do you explain the difference? And so what I did was the gold standard in medicine is a double-blind placebo-controlled trial. I couldn't do that, obviously, but I could do a single-blind trial, and because I hadn't told anybody about the data that I had. So I went to my dean and asked her to set up a series of class observations. And I went into, did class observations, and I'd ask each instructor, many of whom were low drop instructors, 2 questions. One, what did you want to accomplish for your students? What was your goal for your students in taking your course? And 2, how did you get there? And then I listened. And what I was looking for is to see, was there any pattern? That I could identify that sort of distinguished what low drop instructors might be doing differently than the high drop instructors that would lead to the different quantitative outcomes in terms of student drops. And let me go past the next slide, Alec, the conclusion slide, and then the common patterns of teaching slide, and go to the research slide. Now, on the research slide, it should show up blank. It should just have a title that says research, and then at the top, and then drop rate improvement on the bottom.
Yep, that's it.
Good. Now I'm gonna make a point, and then you'll click on the button, and something will come up. A dramatic illustration of a kind of moving static slide. All right. So what I found is that if you looked at how they approached the teaching, there was nothing common. I mean, it's like we all approach teaching sort of how we raise our kids. It's all different. And I couldn't find any common patterns related to the pedagogy, how they taught, how they did their lectures, how they, assessments, no pattern like that. On the other side, and this was kind of interesting, on the more qualitative, not quantitative side, qualitative side, there were 4 things that the low drop instructors always did. Now, they did them in different ways. There's a million anecdotes about this. But one way or another, this is what they were doing, 4 things they were doing. So just click once, Alec, and what should come up is commit to knowing each student by name from the first day of class. Now, that's what I mean by that is talk to your students by their name. Obviously, you're not going to necessarily know everybody when you first come in. But that first day of class, instead of hitting the ground running with a million assignments and a lecture in depth of this, that, or the other thing, take the time to go around the room and ask who the student is, give them their name back, et cetera, et cetera. Calling students by their name is a critical, essential, absolutely non-negotiable first step if you're going to make a good connection with your students. Second, if you go ahead and hit the button one more time, Alan, you got to commit to closely monitoring student behavior and progress and intervene immediately if anything should go amiss. That includes you can't let those guys at nighttime, night classes, sit in the back of the room and fall asleep. You gotta tell them, nope, you're part of this team, you're part of the class. Come on down to the front, whatever it takes. Third, if you hit it again, Alex, you got to commit to having one-on-one meetings with each student. Now, I realize that can be very difficult when you have lecture classes if you've got classes of 200-300 students. But you can say hello to them in the hallway. You can do something where you look at them eye to eye and indicate to them one way or another you're interested in what they're doing in the class, you're interested in how they're going, and that they have a good an instructor that really supports them. You want to be able to say that to them in one way or another. And then the last thing, the last fourth thing, if you'd click on that, Alec, I think you have to commit. You have to have a highly structured course. Every one of these faculty members, there's no way a student didn't know what they were expected to do, including what was going to happen if they missed a class, what was going to happen if they missed the test, what was going to happen if they turned something in late. There were penalties, and the penalties were spelled out. Everybody knew what the penalties were. What was interesting about these successful low-drop instructors, though, is that they use very common sense when applying the penalties. If a student had a case to make and it was a rational, good case, the instructor listened and applied a penalty appropriately. Didn't necessarily just apply it just to apply it. Those 4 things became what we've now called the Drop Rate Improvement Program, and this program has won awards both in Texas and nationally for what it's accomplished. And what it's accomplished started in the very first semester we introduced it, which was in fall 11. Next slide, Alan. In fall 11, what you're looking at are instructors who have drop rates in double figures up to 28%, 22%, big high numbers. And what we did was we asked them to do those 4 things, and to do it, don't change how you teach, don't change your approach, don't change your assessments, don't change your rigor, just interact with your kids, just interact with the students. And it was astounding. Instructor 8 is interesting from the standpoint that although her 3-year average of drops was 18%, the previous semester she had 40%. And just changing, and she was adamant she wasn't going to change anything she did, but she agreed to do this and do the drop rate, and she was stunned. She had never had that few students drop, ever, in her entire career. She'd been an instructor for 30 years. And since then, she's never gone higher than 7%. And she loves it. And her students are doing better. Everybody's doing better. And that's an interesting kind of thing. Because we're running into the time frame here, I want to go to another aspect, and I want to acknowledge that the concept of keeping students in class, and they will do better, has been around for a long time. Been around, and you have hundreds, thousands of studies saying if a student misses this many classes, pick your number, 20%, their grades are going to go down to two levels or whatever, so on and so forth. But in Texas and in Odessa College, we have an interesting situation from a quantitative data perspective. And I want to flip to the next slide. Flip to the next slide. In Texas, we passed a law that you're not allowed to drop more than, if you're in higher education, you're not allowed to drop more than six classes. You got to finish them. And that was put into place in fall of 2007. So we have this interesting situation, is that there was a 6-drop rule in place for almost 4 years before we introduced the drop rate improvement program in fall 11. And as you can see from the data, and here I've put it out in lecture and web courses because everything I say is true for both, even though there's a bit of a gap in some areas. What you can see is that the drops continued when we introduced the drop rate improvement program. They were sort of on a downward trend anyway. Now let's take a look at student success. And by student success, what I mean is the percentage of students on census date who finished the class with a C or better grade, with a C or better grade. So next slide, what you're looking at, same period of time, same students, but look at the difference. When the 6-drop rule went in place, and clearly there were fewer drops in then, success rates didn't budge. But when the drop rate improvement program was put in place, the success rates soared almost from the beginning and continue to rise, leading us to the conclusion that it is not keeping students in class that makes the difference. It's how you keep them in class. It is making that connection between the instructor and the student, a connection that is personalized because you call them by name. It's personalized because you look them in the eye and say, you know what, I'm glad you're here, you're glad you're my student. It's personalized because when they come to you with an excuse for why they were late with their assignment, you actually listen to them. Students will do anything for you, including, remember my population, socioeconomically disadvantaged, rural, part-time, working class students are doing phenomenally. They have transformed. And as I noted in my title, this year we were honored to be in the top 10 of the Aspen Prize Community College Award. And it's great for the college, but really the people that brought us there are our students. They're the ones that have transformed their behavior. They come to college, they stay in class, they study harder or more effectively, and they're graduating in record numbers. So next slide. And today I just want to show you, and this I'll come to the end here and we can do question and answers. I just want to show you where we are today. Next slide. Our unduplicated head count for the first time in school history, we're now over 6,000. That number should really now be 6,200. And that's just up from last year, which was itself a record. And that was up from the year before, which was also a record. So enrollments are skyrocketing. First time in college students, next slide. First time in college. Our bread and butter. We need more students. We need them to come in. Remember, I told you this is not a college-going community. We're up 20% over last year, just for that, and that's growing. And then remember the lagging indicators. What does all this mean for students in terms of how they graduate? Our lagging indicators, as you can see, we now have a soaring number of students that are graduating with degrees that give them careers that make life changes for them. So it's been an exciting ride. It's been very fast over the last literally 4 or 5 years. We have turned Odessa College from a college that no one's really heard about. Legislature would defund us or even talk about defunding us, to a college that is, we're very proud of it. We're seeing our students doing great things. And it really began, and I hope I've convinced you, it really began when, for the first time, we began to actually work from data, accessed our database, and started to develop our ideas and make our decisions based on real quantitative data. So thank you all for your patience. I apologize for the glitches here and there, but I hope the basic message came across.
Don,
Alec,
that was fantastic. Thank
okay.
you for walking us through that. And again, I want to echo Don's apology for the platform issues that we had. I hope that wasn't too distracting from some of the fantastic things that Don had to say. So if anyone would like further information on Zogotech, we'll be distributing a message at the end of the conference, and we'll be able to connect you with people that can show you a little bit more about what Zogotech could do for you. And if there are questions, we are running up to time, so unfortunately we're not going to have time for Q&A just now. But if you do have follow-up questions, please feel free to submit them to us, and we'll make sure that we get something from Don that can help move us forward in this discussion. Don, thank you again for your time. Thank you for everyone's participation. And we have a session that's just about to begin on boosting student engagement through lecture capture. So, Don, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Bye-bye now.